My name is Jessica Thompson. I'm 29 years old and I teach second grade at Lincoln Elementary in Portland, Oregon. That Saturday afternoon was supposed to be a celebration of my sister Amanda's 32nd birthday. Instead, it became the day she hurled a glass of red wine across my face in front of 30 family members and screamed, "You're the family disappointment, Jessica. While the rest of us are building real lives, you're playing with crayons and pretending you matter." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood there in my yellow sundress, now stained crimson, grape juice dripping from my hair onto the grass. The entire backyard fell silent, except for the sound of my 5-year-old nephew Tyler asking his mom why Aunt Jess was crying. But I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from rage because I finally understood that my own sister had orchestrated this public humiliation to pressure me into abandoning everything I'd worked for. If your family ever made you feel worthless for following your passion instead of their expectations, what would you do? Stand there and take it, or finally fight back? 2 weeks earlier, I was sitting in my cozy one-bedroom apartment in Portland's Hawthorne district, grading spelling tests and feeling genuinely content with my life. The morning sunlight streamed through my living room window, illuminating the stack of children's artwork I'd pinned to my refrigerator. 23 little masterpieces from my second grade class, each one a reminder of why I loved what I did. My apartment wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, a reading nook with an overstuffed armchair where I spent Sunday mornings with coffee and novels, and a small kitchen where I'd learned to cook for one without feeling lonely. At 29, I was finally hitting my stride as an educator. After 5 years of teaching, I'd just received tenure at Lincoln Elementary, something I'd dreamed about since graduating from Portland State with my education degree. My salary wasn't impressive by most standards, pulling in $52,000 a year, but it was enough for my simple lifestyle. I drove a reliable Honda Civic, shopped at farmers markets, and spent my free time hiking the Columbia River Gorge or exploring Portland's endless coffee shops and bookstores. My friends were fellow teachers, artists, and nonprofit workers who understood that success wasn't always measured in dollar signs. That particular morning, I was looking forward to a quiet weekend. I'd planned to visit the Japanese garden, maybe catch a movie at the Laurelhurst Theater, and prep my classroom for Monday's science unit on butterflies. My students were in the middle of raising caterpillars, and their excitement about the upcoming transformation was infectious. Teaching second grade meant experiencing pure wonder on a daily basis, watching 7-year-olds discover that caterpillars become butterflies, that books can transport you anywhere, that they're capable of more than they ever imagined. I loved the routine of it all. Morning coffee at 6 a.m., reviewing lesson plans while NPR played softly in the background. The drive through Portland's tree-lined streets to Lincoln Elementary, where I'd unlock my classroom and arrange the day's activities before my 23 little humans arrived like a cheerful tornado. I knew each of their personalities, their learning styles, their fears and dreams. There was Maya, who struggled with reading but created the most incredible story when she drew pictures. There was Jackson, who had ADHD but could focus for hours when we did hands-on science experiments. There was Sophia, whose parents spoke only Spanish at home, and who was blossoming into a confident English speaker through our daily reading circles. This was my world, and I was proud of it. I'd never been the type to chase money or status. Growing up in Salem, Oregon, an hour south of Portland, I'd watched my parents run Thompson's hardware store, a family business my grandfather had started 45 years ago. The store had provided a comfortable middle-class life for our family, but I'd always known it wasn't for me. While my older sister Amanda threw herself into sales and eventually real estate, and my younger brother Michael bounced between different ideas about his future, I'd been drawn to education from an early age. My phone buzzed while I was organizing my desk, pulling me out of my peaceful Saturday morning routine. A text from my mom popped up on the screen. Amanda wants you at her birthday party next Saturday. Family BBQ at our house. She specifically asked for you to be there. Please don't disappoint us again. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar knot forming in my stomach. The last time I'd been home for a family gathering was Christmas, and it had ended with Amanda making snide comments about my phase of teaching and asking when I was going to grow up and get a real job. My relationship with Amanda had been complicated since childhood. As the oldest, she'd always been the responsible one, the achiever, the daughter my parents bragged about to their friends. She'd excelled in high school, gone to Oregon State for business, and immediately started climbing the ladder in Salem's competitive real estate market. By 25, she was married to David Chen, a successful accountant. By 30, they'd bought a beautiful house in Salem's West Hills and had two adorable kids, Emma and Tyler. Amanda embodied everything my parents valued: financial stability, traditional family structure, and tangible success that neighbors could see and admire. I, on the other hand, had always been the dreamer, the kid who preferred reading to playing sports, who volunteered at the library instead of getting a job at the hardware store, who chose Portland State's education program over business school. My parents loved me, but they'd never quite understood my choices. Teaching is noble, my dad would say, but you're so smart, Jessica. You could do anything, run a company, make real money. They saw my career as settling for less, a temporary stop before I came to my senses and chose something more practical. Amanda had never been cruel about it, exactly, but her comments over the years had grown sharper. At family dinners, she'd ask about my little students in a tone that suggested I was running a daycare rather than educating the next generation. She'd mention her latest real estate deals, the expensive vacations she and David took, the private school they were considering for Emma. Never directly comparing our lives, but always making sure everyone at the table understood who was succeeding and who was just getting by. The text from my mom sat on my phone screen like a challenge. She specifically asked for you to be there. That phrase bothered me more than I wanted to admit. When was the last time Amanda had specifically wanted my presence at anything? Usually, family gatherings felt like obligatory appearances where I smiled politely while everyone discussed Amanda's achievements and Michael's latest girlfriend. I was the middle child who'd found her path early and stuck to it, boring in its stability and unsurprising in its modest rewards. Part of me wanted to ignore the invitation entirely. I could claim I had lesson plans to write or papers to grade. But another part of me, the part that still craved my family's approval despite everything, couldn't quite let it go. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe Amanda genuinely wanted me there to celebrate with her. Maybe I was being overly sensitive about past comments and reading too much into innocent teasing. I thought about my grandmother, Nana Thompson, who would definitely be at the party. At 78, she was the
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
family matriarch, a sharp-witted woman who'd helped my grandfather build the hardware store from nothing. She'd always been supportive of my teaching career, often telling me that education was the most important work anyone could do. Teachers change the world one child at a time, she'd say, squeezing my hand at family dinners when the conversation turned to more practical careers. Having her there would make the party bearable, even if Amanda was in one of her moods. I also thought about my younger brother Michael, who at 26 was still figuring out his direction in life. He'd bounced between jobs since college, worked briefly at the hardware store, tried his hand at photography, and was currently managing a local gym while taking night classes in graphic design. Unlike Amanda and me, Michael had never felt pressure to prove himself professionally. As the baby of the family, especially the only son, he got away with being a work in progress. His presence usually lightened the mood at family gatherings, and he had a way of deflecting Amanda's sharper comments with humor. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that I was overthinking the situation. This was just a birthday party, a chance to celebrate Amanda's success and spend time with family I didn't see often enough. I could drive down to Salem, stay for a few hours, eat my mom's famous potato salad, and drive back to Portland before evening. It would be fine. I was probably being paranoid about Amanda's motivations, reading malice into what was likely just typical family dynamics. I texted my mom back, "I'll be there, what time should I arrive?" Her response came immediately, "Perfect, come around 2 p.m. Amanda will be so happy." The enthusiasm in her message made me feel guilty for hesitating. Maybe my family really did miss me, and I was too caught up in my own insecurities to see it clearly. But as I set my phone down and returned to grading spelling tests, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the invitation. Amanda and I weren't close enough for her to specifically request my presence at her birthday party. We exchanged pleasantries at family gatherings, shared updates about our lives, but we didn't call each other for advice or plan sister bonding time. Her birthday parties were usually casual affairs where she invited her real estate colleagues, David's accounting firm friends, and various Salem couples they'd met through their kids' activities. I was typically an afterthought, included because family gatherings required the whole family. The phrase "don't disappoint us again" also nagged at me. When had I disappointed them recently? I'd missed Amanda's housewarming party last fall because I'd committed to chaperoning my students' field trip to the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, but I'd thought everyone understood that I couldn't back out on my professional responsibilities. I'd sent a thoughtful gift and apologized for the scheduling conflict. Was that what my mom was referring to, or was there some larger pattern of disappointment I wasn't aware of? I tried to push these thoughts away and focus on my weekend plans, but the invitation had shifted something in my mood. The quiet contentment I'd felt grading papers was replaced by a familiar anxiety that always accompanied family obligations. I loved my parents and siblings, but I'd never quite figured out how to be myself around them without feeling judged or misunderstood. In Portland, surrounded by fellow educators and people who valued purpose over profit, I felt confident and valued. In Salem, at family gatherings, I often felt like I was defending choices I shouldn't have to justify. The week passed normally. I taught my students about metamorphosis, watched their caterpillars begin forming chrysalises, and felt the deep satisfaction that came from witnessing young minds make connections. On Friday afternoon, as I packed up my classroom for the weekend, I felt genuinely excited about sharing these small victories with my family. Maybe I could tell them about Maya's breakthrough in reading fluency, or Jackson's hypothesis about why butterflies have colorful wings. Maybe they'd see through these stories why teaching mattered to me so much. Saturday morning, I chose my outfit carefully, a yellow sundress that my mom had complimented before, paired with comfortable sandals and a light cardigan in case the weather turned cool. I wanted to look put together, but not overdressed. Successful but not trying too hard. I picked up a thoughtful birthday gift for Amanda, a beautiful coffee table book about Oregon wineries, something that acknowledged her sophisticated tastes without breaking my teacher's budget. The drive from Portland to Salem took me through familiar countryside, past fields and small towns I'd known since childhood. I rolled down the windows and let the spring air fill my car, trying to maintain the optimistic mood I'd cultivated throughout the week. This was going to be a good day. I was going to celebrate my sister, connect with my family, and maybe finally feel like I belonged in their world as much as I belonged in mine. As I pulled into my parents' driveway, I could see that the backyard was already set up for the party. String lights hung between the oak trees, picnic tables were covered with checkered tablecloths, and the scent of barbecue drifted from the back patio. Cars lined the street, indicating that most of the guests had already arrived. I was fashionably late, which was probably for the best. I could make my entrance, give Amanda her gift, and blend into the crowd without too much individual attention. I grabbed the wrapped gift from my passenger seat and walked around to the backyard, where the party was in full swing. The scene was exactly what I'd expected. Amanda holding court near the barbecue grill, surrounded by her real estate colleagues and mom friends, all of them laughing at something she'd said. David was manning the grill with my dad, discussing what looked like sports or politics based on their animated gestures. My mom was bustling around with a pitcher of lemonade, making sure everyone's glasses stayed full. Michael was throwing a football with Emma and Tyler, being the fun uncle who could always be counted on to entertain the kids. I felt a moment of genuine warmth watching this scene. This was my family, imperfect but loving, celebrating together, on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. Maybe I had been overthinking the invitation after all. I walked over to Amanda, who spotted me approaching and broke away from her conversation with a big smile. "Jessica, you made it," she exclaimed, wrapping me in a hug that felt slightly too tight and lasted a beat too long. "I was starting to worry you'd gotten lost in one of your books and forgotten about us." The comment was delivered with a laugh, but I caught the subtle dig about my reading habits. This was classic Amanda, expressing affection wrapped in gentle mockery. "Happy birthday," I said, handing her the wrapped gift. "I hope you like it, I thought of you when I saw it." Amanda unwrapped the book with enthusiasm, exclaiming over the beautiful photography and thanking me profusely. For a moment, I felt like maybe things really would be different today. Maybe she was genuinely happy to see me, but as the afternoon progressed, I began to notice things that made me uncomfortable. Conversation seemed to stop when I approached certain groups. Amanda kept introducing me to her friends as my sister, the elementary school teacher, with an emphasis that made my profession sound quaint rather than professional. When I tried to share a story about my student's butterfly project, I was met with polite but disinterested nods before the conversation quickly shifted back to real estate markets and home renovations. The worst part was how my parents seemed to be watching me throughout the party, not with the warm pride I'd hoped for, but with something that looked almost like disappointment. When I caught my dad's eye during a lull in conversation, he'd smile quickly and look away. My mom kept asking if I was eating enough, drinking enough, having a good time, but her questions felt forced rather than caring. About 2 hours into the party, I was standing near the dessert table, trying to decide if I should stay for cake or gracefully make my exit, when I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. Amanda was talking to my Aunt Carol, my dad's sister-in-law, near the garden shed, where they probably thought no one could hear them. "The timing is perfect," Amanda was saying. "Dad's been talking about this for months, and now that Jessica's here, we can finally address it as a family. She needs to understand that her little teaching experiment has gone on long enough. The store needs real help, not someone who plays with children all day." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a birthday party, this was an intervention. I froze behind the dessert table, my hand still hovering over the birthday cake, as Amanda's words sank in. The store needs real help, not someone who plays with children all day. The casual cruelty of that phrase hit me like a physical blow. I'd spent 5 years building my career, earning tenure, making a difference in 23 young lives every single day, and to my own sister, it was nothing more than playing with children. I stepped back quietly, my heart pounding as I tried to process what I'd just overheard. This entire birthday party, the specific invitation, my mom's enthusiastic response when I'd agreed to come, it all made sense now. They'd been planning this. My family had orchestrated a celebration to mask what was really an ambush, a coordinated effort to pressure me into abandoning everything I'd worked for, to save a struggling business I'd never wanted any part of. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I'd driven down from Portland with a coffee table book and genuine excitement about celebrating Amanda's birthday, and she'd been planning to humiliate me in front of extended family and friends. I thought about all the conversations that had felt slightly off during the party, the way people had looked at me with what I'd interpreted as polite disinterest, but now recognized as pity. They all knew. Every single person at this party knew that I was about to be cornered and pressured to give up my career. I needed to get out of there before whatever they'd planned unfolded, but my legs felt rooted to the grass. Part of me wanted to march over to Amanda and confront her immediately, to demand an explanation for why she'd lied to get me here. but a bigger part of me was paralyzed by the realization that my own family saw me as such a disappointment that they'd resorted to trickery and public pressure to try to change my life choices. Thompson's hardware store had been struggling for years. I wasn't naive about the family business's financial challenges. Big box stores, like Home Depot and Lowe's, had moved into the Salem area over the past decade, undercutting prices and offering selection that a small family store couldn't match. My parents had tried to adapt, focusing on personal service and specialized knowledge that the big chains couldn't provide, but foot traffic had declined steadily. I'd heard snippets of worried conversations during family visits, discussions about declining revenue and increased competition, but I'd assumed they were managing the situation. Apparently, I'd been wrong. If Amanda was talking about needing real help, and my dad had been discussing this for months, the store must be in serious trouble. But why did that automatically become my problem? I was a teacher, not a business manager. I knew nothing about retail operations, inventory management, or customer service in a hardware context. My expertise was in child development, curriculum design, and classroom management. What could I possibly offer a struggling hardware store, except another salary they'd have to pay? Unless they weren't planning to pay me a salary, unless they were expecting me to work for free, to sacrifice my teaching career and financial independence to prop up a business that might not be salvageable anyway. The thought made me nauseous. I'd worked so hard to build my life in Portland, to create financial stability and professional satisfaction on my own terms. I'd never asked my family for money or support beyond the normal emotional connections that families provided. Why was I suddenly responsible for fixing their business problems? I glanced around the backyard, seeing the party with new eyes. Amanda's real estate colleagues were probably here as witnesses, people who would nod approvingly when she explained how important it was for family to stick together during tough times. My parents' friends from the neighborhood and church would provide moral pressure, the Greek chorus of community expectations that had always played such a strong role in Salem's social fabric. Even my grandmother's presence took on a different meaning, the respected family elder, whose disappointment would carry extra weight. The worst part was that I could already imagine how they'd frame the conversation. They wouldn't present it as giving up my career, they'd call it expanding my horizons, or taking on new challenges. They'd talk about how my education and intelligence were exactly what the store needed to compete with the big chains. They'd make it sound like an opportunity rather than a sacrifice, a chance to help family rather than an abandonment of everything I'd worked toward. I knew Amanda well enough to predict her approach. She'd start by praising my accomplishments, acknowledging how proud the family was of my teaching success. Then she'd gradually shift to talking about how the store had always been part of our legacy, how Grandpa Thompson had built something special that deserved to survive. She'd mention how much the community relied on the store, how many local contractors and homeowners depended on the personal service and expertise that only a family business could provide. The emotional manipulation would be subtle, but relentless. References to family loyalty, community responsibility, and making Grandpa's memory proud. They'd probably have numbers ready, projections showing how the store could turn around with the right management and fresh ideas. They'd make it sound like a temporary arrangement just until they got back on their feet, but I knew better. Once I walked away from teaching, once I lost my tenure in my classroom, getting back into education would be nearly impossible. The field was competitive, positions were limited, and schools were reluctant to hire teachers who'd left the profession for business ventures. My hands were shaking as I finally moved away from the dessert table, trying to appear casual, while my mind raced with the implications of what I'd overheard. I needed to find a quiet space to think, to figure out how to handle whatever was coming. But even as I walked toward the garden area behind the house, I could feel eyes following me. The party guests weren't just celebrating anymore, they were positioning themselves for whatever drama was about to unfold. I found a partially secluded spot near my mom's rose garden, where I could still hear the party, but have a moment to collect myself. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was hiding in the garden, where I'd spent countless childhood hours, reading books and avoiding family obligations. Even as a kid, I'd preferred the quiet company of stories to the loud dynamics of family gatherings. Now at 29, I was still seeking refuge in the same spot, still feeling like an outsider in my own family. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment I hoped it might be a friend from Portland, someone from my real life who could remind me that I had an identity beyond family expectations. Instead, it was from Michael. "Where'd you disappear to? Amanda's looking for you, cake time." The casual tone of his message suggested he wasn't part of whatever intervention had been planned, which was both comforting and concerning. If Michael didn't know what was coming, he might inadvertently make things worse by encouraging me to rejoin the group. I looked toward the party, where I could see Amanda scanning the crowd, clearly searching for me. Her expression wasn't the relaxed happiness of a birthday girl enjoying her celebration, it was the focused intensity of someone with an agenda to accomplish. She spotted me near the garden and started walking in my direction, her smile bright but her eyes determined. Behind her, I noticed my parents beginning to move through the crowd, quietly gathering specific people and steering them toward the patio area. The choreography was becoming obvious now that I knew what to look for. This wasn't a spontaneous family discussion, it was a carefully planned presentation. They'd probably assigned roles to different family members, decided who would make which points, and in what order. Amanda would lead, as the successful sibling who'd stayed close to home and understood business realities. My parents would provide emotional weight, the disappointed but loving parents who just wanted what was best for everyone. My grandmother would offer historical perspective about family legacy and community responsibility. I felt trapped in a way I hadn't experienced since childhood, when family expectations had felt overwhelming and inescapable. But I wasn't a child anymore. I was an adult with my own life, my own career, my own financial independence. I didn't owe my family my professional sacrifice, no matter how they framed the request. The hardware store's problems weren't my fault, and they weren't automatically my responsibility to solve. As Amanda approached, I straightened my shoulders and prepared for whatever was coming. I'd always been the family peacekeeper, the one who avoided conflict and tried to make everyone happy. But something had shifted when I overheard that conversation about my little teaching experiment. The dismissive tone, the assumption that my career was somehow less valuable than theirs, had awakened an anger I didn't know I possessed. "There you are," Amanda said, as she reached me, her voice carrying that slightly artificial brightness that meant she was nervous. "I was starting to think you'd snuck out early to avoid the birthday speech," she laughed, but it sounded forced. "Come on, everyone's gathering on the patio, Dad wants to say something before we do the cake." I followed her back toward the party, my stomach churning with anticipation. The backyard had transformed while I'd been hiding in the garden. The casual party atmosphere had been replaced by something more formal and structured. Guests were arranged in a semicircle around the patio area, where my father stood with my mother beside him. My grandmother sat in the place of honor, her walker positioned next to her chair. Michael stood off to one side, looking confused, but trying to appear supportive. As I took my place in the family grouping, I noticed how the other guests were positioned. They weren't just random party attendees anymore, they were an audience. Amanda's real estate colleagues, my parents' friends, extended family members, even some neighbors I recognized from childhood, all watching expectantly, as if they were about to witness something significant. My father cleared his throat and began to speak, his voice carrying the formal tone he used for important family announcements. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate Amanda's birthday with us today. It means so much to Linda and me to have all of you here, sharing this special day with our family." He paused, looking directly at me, "But we also wanted to take this opportunity to discuss something important with all of you, something that affects not just our family, but our entire community." Here it comes, I thought, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The great intervention, dressed up as a community discussion, but really designed to pressure me into giving up everything I'd worked for. I could feel Amanda watching me carefully, probably trying to gauge my reaction and adjust her approach accordingly. "Thompson's Hardware has been part of this community for 45 years, my father continued. My father started this business with nothing but determination and a belief that Salem needed a place where people could get quality products and honest advice. For 4 decades, we've been here for this community, through home projects and emergencies, through good times and tough times. The speech was exactly what I'd expected, hitting all the emotional notes about legacy and community service. I could see people nodding approvingly, already buying into the narrative that would eventually position me as selfish if I refused to help. My father had always been good at this kind of public speaking, finding ways to make personal requests sound like moral imperatives. But we're facing challenges now that we can't handle alone, he continued, his voice heavy with what sounded like genuine emotion. The big box stores, the internet, changes in how people shop and what they expect. We need fresh ideas, new energy, someone with the intelligence and education to help us adapt to a changing world. I felt my cheeks burning as I realized where this was heading. He was about to put me on the spot in front of 30 people to make a public request that would be almost impossible to refuse without looking heartless. The manipulation was masterful in its completeness, creating a situation where saying no would make me appear selfish and ungrateful in front of my entire extended family and social circle. My mother stepped forward then, her eyes glistening with tears that may have been genuine or carefully timed for maximum impact. Jessica, sweetheart, we know how much your teaching means to you. We're so proud of everything you've accomplished, of the difference you make in those children's lives every day. Her voice broke slightly, and I saw several people in the crowd touch their hearts sympathetically. But we need you, she continued, looking directly into my eyes with an intensity that made me want to look away. The store needs someone with your intelligence, your education, your fresh perspective. We've tried everything we can think of, but we're not young anymore, and we don't understand all these new ways of doing business. You could save something that's been in our family for generations. The crowd was completely silent now, everyone focused on this moment of family drama playing out in front of them. I could feel the weight of their expectations, the assumption that of course I would do the right thing and help my family in their time of need. Who could refuse such a heartfelt plea from their parents, especially when it was presented as temporarily helping rather than permanently sacrificing? But I wasn't feeling the guilt and obligation they'd probably expected. Instead, I was feeling a cold, clear anger that was unlike anything I'd experienced before. They'd lied to get me here. They'd turned what should have been a family celebration into a public intervention. They'd dismissed my career as playing with children and assumed I'd be willing to throw it away to solve problems I'd had no part in creating. Amanda stepped forward then, positioning herself next to our parents in a show of family unity. Her expression was sympathetic but determined, the look of an older sister who was about to deliver some tough love for everyone's good. This was her moment, the speech she'd probably been preparing for weeks. "Jessica," she began, her voice gentle but firm, "I know this isn't what you expected to hear today. I know teaching is important to you, and I respect that, but you have to understand what's at stake here. This isn't just about a business, it's about our family's legacy, our community, everything Grandpa and Dad built from nothing." She gestured toward our grandmother who was watching the proceedings with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Nana Thompson has been telling us stories about the early days when Grandpa was working 18-hour days to get the store established. He didn't have a college education like you do, he didn't have business training or management experience, he just had determination and love for his family and community." The historical parallels were obvious and manipulative, casting me as the educated grandchild who could succeed where dedication alone was no longer enough. I could see people in the crowd nodding along, buying into the narrative that my education was a family resource rather than a personal achievement. "You're the smartest person in our family," Amanda continued, her voice growing stronger. "You've got the education, the skills, the intelligence to figure out how to make the store competitive again, and it's not like you'd be giving up teaching forever. Once we get things turned around, once we're stable again, you could go back to education. Maybe even start a family of your own, give those maternal instincts a more natural outlet." That last comment hit me like a slap. The implication that my care for my students was somehow artificial, that real maternal instincts should be directed toward biological children rather than the classroom full of second graders who depended on me every day. The dismissal of my professional dedication as a substitute for real family responsibilities was so insulting I actually gasped. But Amanda wasn't finished. She was building toward her big finale, the emotional climax that would make refusing impossible. The truth is, Jessica, we're running out of time. The bank has been patient, but we need to show them we have a real plan for turning things around. Your business skills, your education, your fresh perspective. That could be exactly what we need to convince them to work with us. She paused dramatically, letting the implications sink in. The store wasn't just struggling, it was apparently in real danger of closing completely. The family legacy, the community resource, the livelihood of my parents, all hanging in the balance while I pursued what they clearly saw as a selfish career choice. I know it's a big decision, Amanda said, her voice softening with what sounded like genuine affection, but family takes care of family. That's what the Thompsons have always done, and that's what we need to do now. The crowd waited in complete silence for my response. 30 pairs of eyes focused on me, expecting me to do the right thing, the family thing, the community-minded thing. My parents looked hopeful but worried, clearly afraid I might refuse, but holding on to the belief that deep down, I was still the responsible daughter they'd raised. Michael looked confused and concerned, probably wondering why this was the first he'd heard about the store's serious problems. My grandmother watched me with unreadable eyes, the family matriarch whose opinion would influence everyone else's judgment of my decision. I felt the weight of 3 generations of family expectations settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat I didn't want to wear. This was the moment they'd orchestrated, the public pressure designed to make refusal impossible. Every relationship I had with extended family, every future gathering, every interaction with Salem's community members who were watching this unfold, would be shaped by what I said next. But as I stood there in my yellow sundress, surrounded by people who were supposed to love and support me, I realized something that changed everything. Not one person in that backyard had asked what I wanted. Not one person had inquired about my students, my classroom, my professional goals or personal happiness. They'd assumed that my life was disposable, that my career was expendable, that my dreams mattered less than their business problems. The anger that had been building since I overheard Amanda's conversation crystallized into something cold and hard and unshakable. I wasn't going to be manipulated into sacrificing everything I'd worked for, no matter how skillfully they'd orchestrated this intervention. I wasn't going to abandon 23 second graders in the middle of the school year to save a business I'd never wanted any part of, and I wasn't going to pretend that their dismissal of my career as playing with children was anything other than deeply insulting and completely wrong. I looked around the circle of expectant faces, took a deep breath and prepared to disappoint them all. No. The single word fell into the silence like a stone dropped into still water, creating ripples of shock that spread across every face in the backyard. For a moment nobody moved. The party guests stood frozen, probably wondering if they'd heard correctly. My parents looked stunned, as if the possibility of refusal hadn't seriously occurred to them. Amanda's confident smile faltered, replaced by confusion, and then something that looked dangerously like anger. "I'm sorry." "What?" Amanda said, her voice still attempting to maintain its gentle, reasonable tone, but with an edge that suggested she thought I'd simply misunderstood the situation. "Jessica, maybe you didn't hear everything we said. This isn't just about us, it's about—" I heard everything perfectly, I interrupted, my voice steadier than I'd expected it to be. "I heard you talking to Aunt Carol by the garden shed about my little teaching experiments and how it's gone on long enough. I heard you planning this ambush disguised as a birthday party. I heard every word of this carefully orchestrated intervention designed to guilt me into abandoning my career." The backyard erupted in uncomfortable murmurs as people processed what I'd just revealed. Some guests looked genuinely surprised, apparently unaware they'd been recruited as unwitting participants in family manipulation. Others shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing they'd been positioned as pressure tools in a strategy that was more calculated than they'd understood. Amanda's face flushed red, her mask of sisterly concern finally slipping completely. "Jessica, you're being dramatic. This is about family, about responsibility, about stepping up when people you love need help. But apparently you're too selfish to understand that. Selfish, the word came out louder than I'd intended, carrying across the backyard with enough force that even the children stopped playing to look in our direction. I'm selfish because I won't abandon the 23 7-year-olds who depend on me every single day. I'm selfish because I won't throw away 5 years of building my career to save a business I never asked to be part of. My mother stepped forward, her eyes wide with the kind of panic that comes when a carefully planned event spirals out of control. Jessica, honey, please don't make a scene. We can discuss this privately. As a family. There's no need to what, Mom? There's no need to have an honest conversation instead of this manipulative performance. I gestured around the backyard, where 30 people were watching my family fall apart in real time. You made this public when you decided to ambush me in front of all these witnesses. You made this a scene when you turned Amanda's birthday party into an intervention. My father's face had gone from hopeful to stern, his jaw set in the expression I remembered from childhood when I'd disappointed him. Jessica Marie Thompson, you will lower your voice and show some respect for your family. We're not asking you to throw your life away, we're asking you to help us save something that's been in this family for generations. By giving up my tenure, abandoning my students in the middle of the school year, and moving back to Salem to work for free in a failing business, I shot back, because let's be honest about what you're really asking. You're not offering me a salary, you're not promising this is temporary, and you're certainly not respecting the career I've spent years building. The crowd was getting restless, some people looking toward their cars as if considering whether this family drama was worth staying for. I saw Amanda's real estate colleagues exchanging glances, probably reconsidering their professional association with someone whose family aired their dirty laundry so publicly. But I was beyond caring about appearances or social consequences. Your career, Amanda said, her voice dripping with disdain, consists of finger painting and story time with a bunch of kids who aren't even yours. You want to talk about what's really important. David and I are raising actual children, contributing to the community, building something meaningful with our lives. You're playing house with other people's kids because you're too afraid of real responsibility. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away for a moment. Every dismissive comment she'd ever made about my profession, every subtle put-down about my choice to remain single and childless, every implication that my life was somehow less valid than hers, crystallized into that one brutal assessment. In Amanda's mind, my entire career was nothing more than arrested development, a woman afraid of growing up and taking on real adult responsibilities. Those kids aren't just other people's children to me, I said, my voice shaking with rage. They're Maya, who couldn't read a single word in September and just finished her first chapter book last week. They're Jackson, who has ADHD and struggles to sit still but can focus for hours when we do science experiments because I learned how to teach to his strengths. There's Sophia, whose parents speak only Spanish at home, and who gained enough confidence in English to give a presentation about butterflies to the whole class. I could see some of the party guests nodding slightly, perhaps beginning to understand that teaching involved more than babysitting. But my family's expressions remained unchanged, still viewing my passion for education as evidence of misplaced priorities rather than professional dedication. They're 23 unique human beings, who trust me to help them discover what they're capable of. I continued, my voice growing stronger. Every single day, I see 7-year-olds overcome fears, master new skills and realize they're smarter and more capable than they knew. I help shape the next generation, teach them to think critically and treat each other with kindness. But apparently, that means nothing to any of you, because it doesn't come with a big salary or impressive title. My grandmother, who had been silent throughout the entire confrontation, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was quiet but carried easily across the backyard, commanding immediate attention from everyone present. Jessica, dear, I think you're forgetting something important about family obligations. Here it comes, I thought. the generational wisdom, the reminder about respect for elders and family loyalty that would be designed to make me feel guilty for standing my ground. My grandmother had always been supportive of my teaching career, but she was also fiercely protective of family unity and traditional values. When your grandfather started the hardware store, he didn't have choices like you do, she continued, her eyes fixed on mine with surprising intensity. He couldn't pursue his dreams or follow his passions because he had family responsibilities that came first. He wanted to be a carpenter, did you know that? He loved working with wood, creating beautiful things with his hands. But his father's business was failing, and the family needed him to step up. I felt my resolve wavering slightly as she painted this picture of family sacrifice and duty. I'd heard stories about my grandfather's dedication to the family business, but I'd never known about his unfulfilled dreams of carpentry. The parallel she was drawing was obvious. If Grandfather Thompson could sacrifice his dreams for family, why couldn't I? He spent 40 years selling nails and paint and tools instead of crafting furniture and cabinets like he'd always wanted, my grandmother continued. He never complained, never made us feel guilty about the dreams he'd given up. He just did what families do, he put the needs of the people he loved ahead of his own desires. The backyard was completely silent now, everyone absorbed in this story of generational sacrifice that was clearly meant to shame me into compliance. I could see my parents nodding approvingly, grateful that the family matriarch was reinforcing their position. Amanda looked vindicated, as if my grandmother's words had proven her point about family obligations and adult responsibility. But then my grandmother's expression shifted, and when she spoke again, her words were not what anyone expected. And it was the biggest mistake he ever made. The gasp from my mother was audible. My father's mouth actually fell open. Amanda looked like she'd been slapped, staring at our grandmother in complete disbelief. The party guests seemed equally stunned, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in the Thompson family dynamic. He died filled with regret about the life he never got to live, my grandmother continued, her voice growing stronger and more determined. In his final months, when the cancer was eating him alive, he didn't talk about the hardware store, or the family legacy, or the community service. He talked about the rocking chair he never built for me, the dining room table he sketched but never had time to create, the workshop he dreamed of having where he could just make beautiful things. She looked directly at my parents, her expression stern in a way I'd rarely seen. He made me promise that his grandchildren would never have to make the same choice he did. He made me swear that they would follow their hearts and build the lives they wanted, not just the lives their families needed them to live. The silence that followed was deafening. This was not the family elder validation my parents had expected. This was a complete undermining of everything they'd built their intervention around, delivered by the one person whose opinion carried more weight than anyone else's in the family. Jessica has found her calling, my grandmother said, looking around the backyard with the authority that came from being the family's acknowledged matriarch. She's doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing, using her gifts to help children learn and grow. And you want her to give that up to save a business that might not be savable anyway. My father found his voice first, though it came out strained and defensive. Mom, with respect, times are different now. Jessica has opportunities that Dad never had. She could come back to teaching later, after we get the store stabilized. This doesn't have to be permanent. Don't lie to yourselves or to her, my grandmother snapped back with surprising vehemence. Teaching positions don't wait around for people who abandon them for business ventures. Tenure doesn't hold itself open for family emergencies. You're asking her to sacrifice her career permanently, and you know it. She turned back to me, her expression softening. Your grandfather would be so proud of what you've accomplished, Jessica. He would never want you to give up work that fulfills you to save a business that's struggling because of forces beyond anyone's control. Amanda looked desperate now, realizing that her strongest source of family authority had just switched sides completely. Nana, You don't understand the financial situation. The store isn't just struggling, it's failing. Without help, Mom and Dad could lose everything. We could lose the family legacy that Grandpa spent his whole life building. Then maybe it's time to let it go, my grandmother said quietly, but with finality that shocked everyone present. Maybe some things aren't meant to last forever, especially when preserving them requires destroying other people's dreams. The party guests were starting to drift away now, clearly uncomfortable with the family conflict that had overwhelmed what was supposed to be a celebration. I could see cars pulling out of the driveway as people made polite excuses and escaped the increasingly volatile situation. Even Amanda's closest friends were gathering their purses and making apologetic noises about early mornings and babysitter schedules. But my immediate family remained locked in this confrontation, 4 generations of Thompsons with completely different ideas about loyalty, sacrifice, and what constituted a meaningful life. My parents looked devastated, their carefully planned intervention not just failing but backfiring spectacularly. Michael stood off to one side looking confused and uncomfortable, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Amanda, however, was not ready to concede defeat. Her face was flushed with anger and embarrassment. Her perfect birthday party turned into a public family meltdown that would probably be discussed in Salem social circles for months. When she spoke again, her voice was loud enough to carry to the remaining guests, clearly intended to shame me into compliance through public pressure. "Fine," she said, throwing her hands up in theatrical frustration. "If Jessica wants to be selfish, if she wants to put her little hobby career ahead of family responsibility, then I guess that tells us everything we need to know about who she really is." The word hobby hit me like a physical blow, the final insult in a day full of dismissals and manipulations. 5 years of college, student loans I was still paying off, graduate coursework, professional development seminars, late nights grading papers and creating lesson plans, none of that mattered to my sister. In her mind, my entire career was just a hobby I'd picked up because I was too immature or selfish to take on real adult responsibilities. "You know what, Amanda?" I said, my voice carrying across the backyard with clarity that surprised me. "You're absolutely right. I am being selfish. I'm choosing to honor the commitment I made to 23 children who depend on me. I'm choosing to continue work that I love, and that makes a difference in the world. I'm choosing to live my own life instead of sacrificing it to fix problems I didn't create." I looked around at what remained of the party crowd, meeting the eyes of neighbors and family friends who had watched this entire confrontation unfold. And if that makes me the family disappointment, then I'll wear that title proudly. Amanda's response was swift and vicious. She grabbed her wine glass from the picnic table beside her, and before anyone could react, hurled the contents directly at my face. The red wine hit me with shocking coldness, soaking through my yellow sundress and dripping from my hair onto the grass. "You are the family disappointment," she screamed, her voice breaking with emotion. "While the rest of us are trying to build something meaningful, you're playing with crayons and pretending you matter. You want to talk about selfish? You're watching our family fall apart and doing nothing to help because you think you're too good for the rest of us." The backyard fell into stunned silence. The few remaining party guests stared in shock at the wine-soaked scene, probably realizing they'd witnessed something that would define Thompson family relationships for years to come. My parents looked horrified, not at Amanda's behavior but at the public spectacle their family had become. I stood there dripping with wine, feeling the stares of everyone present, and realized that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just a disagreement about career choices or family obligations. This was the moment when years of suppressed resentment and fundamental differences in values had finally exploded into the open. "Get out," my father said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "Jessica, I think you should leave, now." The dismissal was swift and final, delivered in front of witnesses who would remember this moment for the rest of their lives. I was being ejected from my sister's birthday party, thrown out of my childhood home, cut off from my family because I refused to sacrifice my career for their business problems. I looked around the backyard one more time, taking in the faces of people who had been part of my life for decades. Some looked sympathetic but unwilling to get involved. Others appeared judgmental, clearly believing that family loyalty should have trumped personal ambition. A few seemed genuinely shocked by the ugliness they'd witnessed, probably wondering how a birthday celebration had devolved into such vicious personal attacks. My grandmother caught my eye as I turned to leave, and I saw something in her expression that looked like pride mixed with sorrow. She nodded slightly, a gesture that seemed to convey approval of my choice, even as she grieved for the family unity that had just been shattered beyond repair. I walked through the house to collect my purse and car keys, my wine-stained dress leaving drops on my mother's carefully maintained hardwood floors. Behind me, I could hear the awkward sounds of a party trying to resume normalcy after witnessing something that could never be taken back or forgotten. Forced laughter, uncomfortable conversations, the gradually decreasing number of voices as more guests found excuses to leave. As I drove away from Salem, heading back toward Portland and the life I'd chosen for myself, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The weight of family expectations, the constant pressure to be someone I wasn't, the obligation to justify my choices to people who would never understand them, all of it was finally gone. My phone buzzed repeatedly during the drive, texts from extended family members who had witnessed the confrontation and felt compelled to offer their opinions. Some supported my decision, others criticized my selfishness, most just expressed shock at how ugly things had gotten. I ignored them all, focusing on the road ahead and the life that was waiting for me. By Sunday evening, I was back in my apartment, my wine-stained dress soaking in the bathtub, and my lesson plans for the upcoming week spread across my kitchen table. The familiar routine of preparing for my students felt like coming home after a long and difficult journey. On Monday morning, I walked into my classroom early as always, turning on the lights and arranging the day's activities before my 23 second graders arrived. When they burst through the door with their usual enthusiasm, chattering about weekend adventures and eager to check on their chrysalises, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with salary or family approval. Maya ran up to me with a book she'd finished over the weekend, her face glowing with pride as she described her favorite parts of the story. Jackson bounced excitedly as he told me about a butterfly he'd seen in his backyard, making connections between our classroom learning and the real world. Sophia shyly approached my desk with a drawing she'd made of the butterfly life cycle, her English growing more confident every day. These were the moments that mattered, these were the relationships that fulfilled me. These were the victories that made my career meaningful, not despite the modest salary and lack of prestige, but because the work itself was important and the impact was real. The hardware store closed 6 months later. I heard about it through my cousin Rachel, who called to let me know that my parents had finally accepted the inevitable and sold the building to a developer who planned to turn it into condominiums. The family legacy that they'd been so desperate to preserve was gone anyway, despite all the manipulation and emotional blackmail they'd used trying to save it. Amanda and I didn't speak for over a year. The few times we encountered each other at extended family gatherings, we maintained polite but distant interactions, both of us clearly aware that something irreparable had been damaged that afternoon in the backyard. Michael served as a buffer between us when necessary, but he was careful not to take sides or get pulled into the ongoing tension. My parents eventually reached out, but the relationship was never the same. They'd seen me refuse a direct request for help, and couldn't quite forgive what they perceived as abandonment during their time of need. I'd seen them dismiss my career and manipulate me through public pressure, and I couldn't quite forget the calculated cruelty of their intervention. But my grandmother and I grew closer than ever. She called me regularly, always wanting to hear about my students and my latest classroom projects. She told me stories about my grandfather's unfulfilled dreams and made me promise to never compromise my own happiness for other people's expectations. When she passed away 2 years later, she left me a letter expressing pride in my choice to follow my calling regardless of family pressure. The letter also contained a surprise that no one in the family had expected. She'd quietly saved money for decades, accumulating a nest egg that she left entirely to me with specific instructions that it be used to further my education or support my teaching career. The inheritance allowed me to pursue a master's degree in education without taking on additional debt, eventually leading to a position as a curriculum specialist that combined my love of teaching with opportunities to help other educators. Looking back now, I realize that afternoon in my sister's backyard was one of the most important moments of my life. Not because of the confrontation or the dramatic wine-throwing scene that became family legend, but because it forced me to articulate and defend what truly mattered to me. It made me choose between family approval and personal integrity, between keeping the peace and standing up for my values. I chose myself. I chose my career. I chose the 23 7-year-olds who needed me to be in their classroom every day, helping them discover their potential and navigate the challenges of learning and growing. And in the end, that choice led to a life of deeper satisfaction and more meaningful success than anything I could have achieved by sacrificing my dreams to save someone else's failing business. The family disappointment turned out to be the family member who was most true to herself. And that was a disappointment I could live with proudly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.